Yo guys, what is up? Here we are with another reading video, and we are on chapter 22, the most exciting chapter out of all of them. So make sure, if you're watching this, to stay put for the entire video. Or if you want to just hear the very best part, just skip to the end. That's about all I gotta say. So without further ado, let's get into Chapter 22, The Only Thing to Fear, by Caroline Tung Richmond. Chapter 22. Following Aline's instructions, Zara hurried down the corridor, turned right, and found herself in front of two towering doors, more than double her height, the entrance to the residential suite. The mahogany doors were carved with delicate roses and twirls of ivy. An antique, most likely, imported from Germany from some gargantuan sum. She knew that they were locked before she even touched them. The Corps had always been vigilant in protecting the Führer. No door was left unsecured, although now it was the Corps of one. Only the medic remained. Zara pressed her hands against the door to open them, but gunshots burst from within the suite, puncturing through both the antique doors and the lock. Ducking down, she hid behind the wall until the soldiers were forced to reload. Then, with a web of lightning on her hands, she kicked the door open and launched the bolt in a wide arc. 5 guards flew backwards, sprawling over the carpet. One of them struggled to rise, but Zara knocked another bolt into him. Pain hummed along her forehead. She could feel her well of energy dwindling each time she used her powers, and she knew she had to save enough strength for the Führer. Gingerly, she stepped through the dismantled doorway to find a circular sitting room before her. The soldiers lay across the cream carpet, their uniforms smoking. She eyed them one by one, waiting for them to twitch or reach for their guns. But none of them moved. The tick-tock of a grandfather clock floated into Zara's ears, reminding her that she was losing precious time. Her gaze swept across the space, getting her bearings. 6 doors spanned the arc of the room, each one tightly shut. Zara tiptoed to the first door on her left, as Aline had told her, and readied a ball of lightning on her hand. Better safe than sorry, she thought as she reached for the handle. Her fingers never met the knob. Heavy strides thumped behind her, and Zara threw herself onto the carpet as a pistol fired into the sitting room. But she wasn't fast enough. Red-hot pain burst through her chest, right below her ribs. She gasped, and a lightning bolt flew free from her hand. A man screamed. Zara withered against the floor, painless from the pain. Breathless from the pain. She almost passed out from it. She would have welcomed that even, but the blankness didn't take her. Her hands groped along her chest, but she didn't find any blood, only a puncture on her vest where the bullet had stopped. The man screamed again, and Zara forced herself onto her knees, her cracked ribs making each breath agony. Colonel Eckhart stood by the door to the residential wing, and a blackened pistol lay by his feet. A small bolt of her lightning must have hit the gun. Its metal burned the colonel's hand, which had ruptured with red blisters. Zara propped herself against the wall, each breath a torture, and she tried to muster a gale-force wind to knock him off his feet, but the wind wouldn't come. Cradling his hand against him, Colonel Eckhart hobbled toward her. "You filthy mischling!" he spat. She tried to summon another lightning bolt, but he kicked her in the ribs. The world went white with pain. Zara curled into herself, wanting to scream, but only a hoarse whimper came out. She clenched her fists, begging for the wind or lightning to hear her. "I should have killed you weeks ago." He lifted a blue and white vase from a buffet table and raised it over his head. Zara raised a feeble hand to stop him. His intentions were clear. He didn't need a gun to kill her. The colonel brought the vase down, and Zara shoved her hand up to meet it, channeling every particle of air that she could. A desperate wind whooshed forward, and the colonel flew backward, smashing into an oil painting of Rishmal Balder's wife. Colonel Eckhart brushed off the hit, fury in his piercing eyes, and he was about to smash in Zara's head with his fists. Whoa, that does not make sense. And he was about to smash in Zara's head with his fists until he stopped mid-swing. "Father!" Colonel Eckhart's head jerked towards the doorway. Zara did the same. Bastian stood in the doorway, a medical bag slung over one shoulder, and a pistol cocked in his hand. The barrel was pointed right at the colonel's chest. Zara thought she was seeing things. Bastian wasn't supposed to be back at the factory, not here in the chaos of the White House, pointing a gun at his father. She blinked hard to chase the illusion away, but Bastian and the gun remained in the doorframe. The colonel's face flooded with relief at first. Then he snarled when he realized Bastian was pointing the gun at him. "Put that thing away!" Bastian shook his head. "Are you going to shoot me, mean son?" Colonel Eckhart said in disbelief. Bastian's fingers trembled so much that he used both hands to steady the pistol. "Step away from her, father. Is she the reason why you turned traitor?" His voice lowered into a growl. "This Unterschmidt. Step away. I won't say it again." Colonel Eckhart didn't budge. "My own son, the defector." He barked out a bitter laugh. "Are you really abandoning me and your mother over this Michelin girl?" "You're the one who abandoned mother to that facility," Bastian roared. Anger overtook his features. Zara had never seen him like this before. "And Opa, you could have asked for leniency. Both mother and I begged you for him, but you let him die. That man was poison to our family." His cold eyes looked Bastian up and down. "This is his influence, isn't it?" "So what if it is?" said Bastian defiantly. Streaks of redness climbed up the colonel's neck. "Look at what your precious grandfather has made you become. Turning your back against your own country, and now your own blood. I should have had your precious Opa killed years ago." Colonel Eckhart charged at Bastian so fast that Bastian barely realized what was happening. With his arm raised, the colonel kept on top of him, sending Bastian's pistol careening across the floor. They grappled, fist flying. Colonel Eckhart punched Bastian in the jaw, then in the stomach. Despite the throbbing in her chest, Zara pushed herself up and mustered a spark of lightning, just enough to stun someone. Once Bastian shoved his father off him, she sent that spark shooting into the colonel's back. He cried out, his arms jerking upward. He tumbled over, his eyes clasped shut. Bastian stood frozen, panting hard. Is he dead?" He knelt by his father's body and pushed 2 fingers against his wrist. "There's a pulse." Zara couldn't tell if he was relieved or disappointed. Ignoring the pain in the ribs, she stared at Bastian, still stunned to see him in front of her. "What are you doing?" The question finally tumbled out of her. "You're supposed to be back at the factory." "I came with the others. They needed medics, so I volunteered." His voice was flat, and his face had emptied of color. Zara wondered how many deaths he had witnessed this night. "It's mayhem outside. There are more rebels coming, but the Nazis already sent reinforcements. I knew I had to find you." Her head jolted over his shoulder at the sound of gunshots peppered their ears. "We don't have much time." "We? This isn't your mission." As relieved as Zara was to see him, she didn't want him here. She'd already watched her uncle get nearly killed. She couldn't lose someone else she cared about. And she cared about Bastian. It was terrifying for her to admit that, but she did. The thought of seeing him gunned down or ripped apart by some sentinel made her bones shudder. "We need to go with the others before it's too late." He didn't move an inch. "Where is the Führer?" "Bastian, go." She didn't have time to argue with him. If the reinforcements were on their way, they had minutes at most. She shoved him towards the doorway, but it was like pushing a wall of muscle. Bastian caught her hands and gently placed them at her sides. "You don't want to see what I have to do," Zara pleaded. "Yes, I do." He drew in a long, long breath. "For his sake." His head bowed and said, "For dich, Opa. For your grandfather. For you, grandfather." Zara looked at him, searching his eyes. "Are you sure?" There was no more time to argue. She nodded at the first door on the left. "He's in there." Cautiously, she stepped to the door and summoned a bolt of lightning into her palm. She wished she could coax it larger, but it was the best she could do with the ache in her ribs. She glanced at Bastian. "On the count of 3, she whispered. He nodded and braced himself against the wall next to the door while she stood opposite him. 1, 2, 3. She blasted the door open with a surge of wind. And that's when the shooting started. Instincts took over Zara. She slammed to the floor and shouted for Bastian to do the same. She cradled her head as the bullet soared past, blasting past them in a deafening roar before Zara finally heard the hollowing ping. An empty magazine. Now, before they reload, Bastian said urgently. Zara flung a tornado through the door, saving her last bit of lightning for Dieter. Bastian shielded himself as chunks of plaster and glass flew into the hallway, biting against his clothes. A man's voice cried out from inside the room. Zara flung it, crawling forward over the Dieter's. Zara peered into the suite and saw an opulent living room, large enough to consume her entire entire house. Furniture lay toppled on its sides, victim of her tornado. A silver lamp lay cracked on a plush rug, while a glass chandelier swung wildly from side to side. Bastian tilted her head. Blood, she said, pointing to a bright red smear on the cream carpet. Zara held her breath and got to her feet. Stepping silently into the suite, she followed the blood trail behind a mahogany-trimmed sofa and stopped cold when she saw the body. It's the medic, she murmured to Bastian. Lying on one side, the medic sprawled over the carpet with a sharp chunk of wood jammed into his neck. His limp fingers had curled around the wood, maybe in an attempt to heal himself, but he'd bled out too quickly. Bastian searched for a pulse. He's dead. He craned his neck over the rest of the suite. Did the Führer escape? The safe room, Zara thought. Blood rushed out of her head. If the Führer had made it to the elevator in the safe room, then this whole night had been for nothing. She hurried around the suite, yanking each door open. The bathroom, the laundry, the linen closet. Garrison had mentioned that the route to the safe room was hidden inside a closet. Was this the one? She thrust her hands through the sheets and towels until she bumped into a fingerprint pad on the wall. A red button flashed on the pad, along with an angry error message. Garrison had done it. He had snuck into the White House basement, discovered the elevator that connected the safe room to the closet, and destroyed the elevator's control locks, effectively preventing Dieter's escape. She whispered a thank you to Garrison, hoping he had gotten out of the building by now, and looked back at Bastian. Dieter didn't make it out. He must be in here somewhere. Then we better find him. They stalked through a wood-paneled library and saw the main sleeping area ahead, where the Führer must be waiting for them. Only footsteps away, Zara's heartbeat launched like a rocket. And there, she mouthed to Bastian, who had come up behind her. She conjured one more lightning bolt, wishing it could burn hotter, and glanced inside the room. The Dieter was crouched next to a grand four-poster bed, which was neatly made silk pillows and down blankets. He stumbled toward Zara with a thin cry, his hands outstretched to strangle her. The lightning leapt from Zara's hand. Dieter was thrown backward, his entire body twitching from the direct hit. When he stopped shaking, he clawed at his chest and struggled for breath, his watery eyes narrowing at Zara and Bastian. Hatred seethed inside his sunken pupils. His lips puckered to spit at them, but the spittle merely dribbled down his chin. Zara stared right back. Here he was, the leader of the Empire, the great Führer himself. For years she had mopped the floors under his portrait at the Academy, around those round apple cheeks and that smear of a mustache. But this husk of a man looked nothing like that portrait now. His coarse, white skin hung loosely off his face, and his eyes had retreated into their sharp, angled sockets. He looked at him as if death had laid claim to him already. A dying skeleton. You must think yourself very clever, the Führer rasped in German. But my soldiers will hunt you down. They'll tear you apart, piece by piece. Faint shouts carried into Zara's ears, while piercing helicopter lights roamed beyond the windows. She yanked the camcorder from her pocket and shoved it into Bastian's hands. Start taping. Why? He said, taken aback. We have to, for the Alliance broadcast. If it were up to her, they would kill the Führer and leave right afterward. But the Alliance needed this footage for the mission to succeed. If the Nazis had one stunt double for the Führer, they would try to use another to hide his death, unless the Alliance had proved that the true Dieter was dead. Zara waited for Bastian to point the video camera at her and Dieter. He motioned for her to start. She only stared at the lens, wishing Garrison was here, because he would know what to say. The shouts rose in volume down the hallway. Citizens of the territory, Zara said. The first thing that she could think of. We The Revolutionary Alliance speak to you tonight from the White House. Now Fuhrer tried to call away, but she stepped in front of him, her boots stepping onto his feeble fingers. He wailed, but she didn't move. Her mind flashed with images of her mother and Miss Towling and Molly, who had given their lives to Dieter's regime. The courage sustained her for what she had to do next. We've suffered under the Fuhrer's oppressive rule for decades, but tonight we claim our freedom. Zara didn't know where these words were coming from, but she didn't question them. Dieter Hitler! She pointed at his head and summoned a spark of lightning, channeling everything inside her to coax it larger. It shone brightly in the dim room, lighting the Fuhrer's sick countenance. You will be punished for your crimes against us. You dirty, sullied, unerschmish. Zara released the lightning, and it rammed into Dieter's chest, where it traveled ravenously over his frail frame. Dieter's limbs convulsed from the strike, and he clutched tightly at his heart, choking on his breath. The wheezing stopped, and Zara knew he was dead. She blinked at his body. She had killed the Fuhrer, the leader of the Nazi Empire. Her heart felt cold. Turn off the camera, she said to Bastian. Footfalls pounded into the residential ring, peppered with yelling voices, German voices. Zara's gaze leapt towards the sound. She would have to wait to process what she had done. Right now, they needed to get out of the White House. Bastian shoved the camera into his pants pocket. What do we do? He cried. She yanked him towards the nearest window and wrapped her arms around him. Don't let go, she said, before blasting a window open with a gale-force wind. As the soldiers flooded into the room, she launched Bastian and herself skyward as fast as the air would take them. They catapulted above the White House, above all of New Berlin, until the shrine to Fuhrer Adolf was only a bright smudge below them. Even then, Zara urged them higher until they skimmed the lowest drifting clouds, into a current so cold that their breath frosted as soon as it left their lips. Bastian's hands clutched around her like a life vest. Is anyone following us? He shouted against the wind. A helicopter? A sentinel? Too cold to say a word. Bastian shook his head. She pointed them westward, ignoring the chattering of her teeth. Her ribs ached with every movement, but Zara pushed them onward. Soon they had left the city behind. There was no time for rest, no place to stop. Not for traitors like them, not for Zara, killer of the Fuhrer, the Mischling, the commie, who had slain the most powerful man in the world. And that is the end of chapter 22. So there is 3 more chapters, 23, 24, 25, yeah. There are 3 more chapters, so make sure you come back. This is not the end of the book. And I am pretty hopeful that I can get the opposite to this, where they talk about the Japanese side. So I'm hoping I can get that. If not, I've got plenty of books, so I'm not worried about not running out of books. Oh, but before we leave, today's book suggestion is One Out of My Mind. It is a book about a girl with a physical disability where she a lot of times cannot control her movements, and she cannot stand, talk, walk, eat by herself. But she is incredibly smart. Like Stephen Hawking smart. That's think about that kind of thing, term smart. So, it's a really good book. Please, if you can, make sure to read it. And I will see you guys in my next video. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below.